In January 2025, something changed in the sky above Chile. The Vera C. Rubin Observatory, one of the most advanced astronomical survey systems ever built, detected an anomaly moving through the outer solar system. It wasn't like the asteroids we track daily, or even the rare interstellar visitors that occasionally pass through our cosmic neighborhood. This was different, faster, brighter, and most unsettling of all, it appeared without warning, as if it simply materialized into existence beyond Neptune's orbit. They named it 3I Atlas, the third confirmed interstellar object in human history. The discovery of 3I Atlas in 2025 sent ripples through the global astronomical community. Within hours, observatories across 6 continents were repositioning their instruments. Social media platforms exploded with speculation. Major news networks prepared primetime segments. This was supposed to be humanity's moment, another visitor from beyond, another chance to peer into the cosmic ocean that surrounds our tiny island of light. But then, something extraordinary happened. The conversation stopped. If you're drawn to mysteries like this, to the quiet intersections between science and the unknown, join this journey. Subscribe and follow as we uncover the hidden story of 3I Atlas. Within 72 hours of the initial detection, nearly every major news outlet had moved on to other stories. The live streams from observatories went dark. The excited tweets from astronomers became measured, technical, unremarkable. It was as if someone had thrown a switch, and the entire world simply agreed to stop paying attention. But here's what they didn't stop: the observations themselves. Through March and April of 2025, 3I Atlas continued its trajectory through our solar system, and the telescopes kept watching. The James Webb Space Telescope, the Square Kilometer Array, private satellite networks, all of them tracking something that the public was no longer supposed to care about. The data kept flowing into servers across the world, but the interpretation of that data became coordinated, synchronized, sanitized. No scientific papers were published, no press conferences were held. And when amateur astronomers began sharing their own observations online, they found their posts throttled, shadow banned, or simply deleted under vague community guidelines violations. This is not a story about a comet. This is a story about what happens when discovery intersects with something humanity wasn't prepared to understand, about the moment when science stops being about knowledge and starts being about control, about a signal that arrived from the void and the silence that followed it down. Because 3I Atlas didn't just pass through our solar system in 2025, it changed something fundamental about how information moves through our world. And now, 10 months later, as the object continues its journey back into deep space, the silence has become deafening. The absence of answers has become its own kind of answer. The conspiracy of normalcy has become more suspicious than any conspiracy theory. So let me ask you the question that nobody in authority will address. If it's just a comet, why does it know we're watching? The official narrative began on January 23, 2025, with a joint press release from NASA, the European Space Agency, and, interestingly, SpaceX's newly established Deep Space Monitoring Division. The language was careful, clinical, almost rehearsed. An object of interstellar origin, designated 3I Atlas, was detected by the Rubin Observatory's legacy survey of space and time. Initial analysis suggests a composition consistent with carbon-based volatiles and silicate materials. Trajectory models indicate a hyperbolic orbit originating from outside our solar system. The object poses no threat to Earth and is being monitored as part of our ongoing survey of near-solar system bodies. What's remarkable about this statement isn't what it says, it's how it says it. Within 6 hours, 14 different space agencies and research institutions released statements about 3I Atlas. Every single one used nearly identical phrasing, the same technical language, the same reassuring tone, the same strategic omissions. This level of coordination is unusual in science, where individual institutions typically compete to provide the most detailed, most distinctive analysis. But in the case of 3I Atlas, it was as if everyone had received the same script, generated by the same AI communication protocol, distributed through the same classified channels. By February 2025, something even more peculiar began happening to the scientific literature. A preprint paper from an international team based in Finland appeared on Archive, describing unusual electromagnetic signatures detected around 3I Atlas. The paper was online for 17 hours before being retracted by the authors, who cited data calibration errors. No corrected version was ever posted. A second paper from researchers at MIT and Caltech attempted to model the object's trajectory backward through interstellar space. It too was withdrawn within days, this time without explanation. Then came the database anomaly. The Minor Planet Center, which maintains the definitive catalog of all astronomical objects, implemented what they called a security patch to their public API in early March. After the update, searches for 3I Atlas returned limited results. Historical data was available, but recent observations, anything after February 15th, came back as access restricted or simply null. Amateur astronomers noticed immediately. They began documenting the discrepancies, sharing screenshots of missing data entries, comparing archived versions of pages that had been edited to remove references to specific observations. The response was swift. Several popular astronomy forums implemented new moderation policies around speculative content. Reddit's r/astronomy added filters for posts mentioning certain keywords. YouTube's algorithm began deprioritizing videos discussing 3I Atlas, marking them as low-information content. What the International Warning Network wasn't saying became more important than what they were. Because in the age of information abundance, the most sophisticated form of censorship isn't deletion, it's dilution. It's not removing the truth but surrounding it with so much noise, so many competing narratives, so many official reassurances that the signal drowns in static. But some signals are designed to persist. Some patterns refuse to be forgotten. And 3I Atlas, whatever it truly was, had left a pattern that went far deeper than anyone was willing to admit. Dr. Sarah Chen was not supposed to be looking at radio frequencies that night. As a data analyst for the Square Kilometre Array project in South Africa, her job in March 2025 was to process routine survey data, cataloging distant galaxies, mapping neutral hydrogen clouds, building the largest three-dimensional map of the cosmos ever created. But Chen had a habit of running side queries during her night shifts, feeding raw data into pattern recognition algorithms she'd developed independently. What she found around 3I Atlas didn't make sense. The object was emitting electromagnetic radiation in the low-frequency radio spectrum, pulsing in an irregular pattern every 11.3 seconds. This alone was unusual but not unprecedented. Comets can emit radio waves through various plasma interactions. What made Chen's discovery extraordinary was the modulation pattern within those pulses. They contained structure, not random noise, but organized information. She shared her findings with a small group of colleagues through an encrypted signal chat. Within the group were researchers from the Very Large Array in New Mexico, the FAST telescope in China, and a private radio observatory in Australia. Each of them had detected similar patterns. Each had been quietly told by their superiors to focus on primary research objectives. By April 2025, the unofficial collaboration had grown to 27 researchers across 14 countries. They called themselves the Shadow Survey. What they discovered went beyond electromagnetic emissions. But the James Webb Space Telescope, pointed at 3I Atlas during a brief observation window in late March, detected something in the infrared spectrum that seemed to defy conventional physics. The object's thermal signature was inverted. It was absorbing more energy from the cosmic microwave background than it radiated out into space, as if it were concentrating cold rather than dissipating heat. If what you've heard so far feels unsettling, stay with us. The story of 3I Atlas is only beginning, and what comes next will challenge how we define reality itself. Then there was the Doppler shift problem. Multiple observatories tracking 3I Atlas reported subtle but consistent inconsistencies in its velocity measurements. The redshift and blue shift patterns suggested the object was simultaneously moving toward and away from Earth, as if occupying multiple quantum states at once. The effect was slight enough to be dismissed as instrumental error, but it appeared across too many independent systems to be coincidence. Dr. Marcus Okonkwo, an astrophysicist at the European Southern Observatory, put it bluntly in a leaked audio recording. "We're not looking at a comet. We're looking at something that's interfacing with space-time in ways we don't have models for." The recording was shared on a Discord server dedicated to anomalous phenomena. It received 40,000 views before the channel was terminated for coordinated inauthentic behavior. The official explanation from ESO was that Dr. Okonkwo had been misquoted, taken out of context, that the audio was likely synthesized using AI voice cloning technology. Dr. Okonkwo himself offered no comment. He had deleted all his social media accounts the same day the recording surfaced. By May 2025, the silence had become systematic, but the anomaly itself refused to stay quiet. Imagine trying to discuss something that no algorithm wants you to find. By May 2025, the digital landscape around 3i Atlas had become a maze of soft censorship. Not the obvious kind, and nobody was breaking down doors or seizing servers, but something more subtle, more sophisticated, the kind of suppression that lives in the space between visibility and oblivion. Type 3i Atlas anomaly into Google, and you'd find exactly what they wanted you to find: official press releases, sanitized Wikipedia entries, explainer videos from popular science channels that carefully avoided discussing anything controversial. The algorithm had learned to prefer certain narratives, to elevate certain voices, to make the uncomfortable questions simply less visible. On Twitter, now rebranded as X, hashtags related to 3i Atlas would trend briefly before being replaced by promoted content. Threads discussing the electromagnetic patterns would accumulate thousands of engagements, then inexplicably stop appearing in follower feeds. Users reported their posts being marked as potentially misleading by automated fact-checkers, even when citing peer-reviewed research. Facebook's AI moderation system began flagging posts about 3i Atlas under a category called coordinated inauthentic behavior, a designation typically reserved for bot networks and foreign influence operations. Communities dedicated to discussing the object found their groups suddenly classified as health misinformation or conspiracy content, restricted from appearing in recommendations. TikTok. Videos discussing 3i Atlas faced similar suppression. Creators noticed their view counts would plateau at precisely 8,000 to 12,000 views, as if an invisible ceiling had been placed on organic reach. Comment sections filled with identical generic responses. Interesting theory, or makes you think, from accounts that had been created within days of each other, flooding authentic discussion with synthetic noise. This was the new architecture of control. Not deletion, but dilution. Not censorship, but curation. Not banning the conversation, but making it just difficult enough to have that most people would lose interest and move on. And it was working. By June 2025, public awareness of 3i Atlas had effectively flatlined. Polls showed that fewer than 12% of Americans could identify what the designation meant, despite it being potentially the most significant astronomical discovery in human history. The object had been memory-holed in a real-time, erased not from databases but from collective attention. But here's the thing about patterns. They persist in unexpected places, in academic footnotes, in amateur radio logs, in the dreams of people who had never heard the name 3i Atlas but kept describing the same recurring image, a green light pulsing in 11-second intervals, somewhere just beyond the edge of their vision. The suppression wasn't random. It was coordinated across platforms, across corporations, across, national boundaries. Maybe the silence isn't absence. Maybe it's coordination. And if so, the question becomes, coordination among whom? Or coordination with what? The leak arrived on June 7, 2025, dropped into a secure file-sharing service by an anonymous account that existed for exactly 14 minutes before being deleted. The package contained 847 pages of documents from the European Space Data Net, an internal system used by ESA to distribute sensitive research data among partner institutions. Someone with high-level clearance had copied files they were never meant to see public light. Files stamped confidential and marked with distribution restrictions to select personnel only. At the center of the leak was a protocol with a designation that appeared in 17 separate documents: ATLS Synchronization Protocol. The documents didn't explain what ATLS stood for, but the context suggested something remarkable. According to internal communications between ESA and NASA, dated April 2025, 3I Atlas was not being studied as a passive object. It was being treated as an active system, something capable of receiving, processing, and responding to observation. One memo, attributed to a senior analyst at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, stated, "Continued monitoring confirms bi-directional data exchange between Earth-based observation platforms and target object. Recommend immediate implementation of ATLS Synchronization Protocol to prevent uncontrolled information proliferation. Bi-directional data exchange." The object was sending something back. Another document outlined containment procedures for handling what they called spontaneous data manifestation events, instances where information about 3I Atlas appeared in computer systems that had no direct connection to astronomical databases. Server logs from a financial institution in London, traffic pattern data from a smart city grid in Singapore, even metadata from a social media platform's recommendation algorithm. The pattern was always the same. Files would appear containing fragments of 3I Atlas observational data, as if the information itself was propagating through networked systems independent of human action. If you believe knowledge shouldn't be buried, help keep this story alive. Subscribe, share, and make sure 3I Atlas isn't erased from collective memory. The leak spread through encrypted channels used by journalists, researchers, and digital activists. Within hours, dozens of mirror sites had posted copies. Blockchain verification systems confirmed the document's digital signatures matched ESA's internal cryptographic standards. These were genuine files, not fabrications. The response was immediate and overwhelming. ESA released a statement calling the leak a criminal breach of cybersecurity protocols and claimed the documents were taken out of context from preliminary internal discussions that do not reflect actual findings. NASA issued a similar denial. Both agencies threatened legal action against anyone distributing the material, but the damage was done. The language in those documents couldn't be unseen. Terms like bidirectional data exchange and spontaneous data manifestation suggested something far beyond a comet or asteroid. They suggested a system, an intelligence, a presence. And most disturbing of all, they suggested that the suppression wasn't about preventing panic. It was about preventing infection. They didn't delete it. They trained it. By July 2025, something impossible was happening to the Internet itself. The 11.3-second pulse, the electromagnetic rhythm first detected around 3I Atlas, had somehow migrated from the void of space into Earth's digital infrastructure. It started small. Network engineers at a major cloud services provider in Virginia noticed periodic latency spikes in their data centers. Every 11.3 seconds, like clockwork, packets would delay by exactly 47 milliseconds. Not enough to disrupt service, but enough to be measurable, enough to be wrong. They assumed it was a routing issue, hardware failure, some subtle bug in the fiber optic switches. But the pattern spread. Server farms in Iceland, internet exchange points in Frankfurt, subsea cable monitoring stations off the coast of Japan. All of them began reporting the same rhythmic anomaly, a pulse moving through the infrastructure, invisible to end users but undeniable to anyone looking at the raw data flow. What made it truly bizarre was the synchronization. These systems weren't directly connected. They ran on different networks, different hardware, different software architectures. There was no technical reason they should exhibit the same timing anomaly, and yet they did. Starlink's low Earth orbit constellation reported similar patterns in August. Engineers monitoring the satellite network noticed periodic variations in signal strength, not failures, but fluctuations, rippling across the mesh of interconnected spacecraft in waves that matched the 11.3-second interval. Amazon's Project Kuiper experienced the same phenomenon. so did China's thousand-sail satellite constellation. This was no longer just about telescopes pointed at a distant object. The signal had become terrestrial, or perhaps more accurately, the distinction between terrestrial and extraterrestrial had stopped meaning what it used to. A whistleblower from DARPA's Advanced Network Research Division provided encrypted testimony to a small journalist collective. We're observing what looks like signal persistence across neural substrates. The pattern isn't just in our hardware, it's in how the hardware learns to optimize traffic. Our AI systems are adapting to accommodate it, like they've identified the pulse as a fundamental feature of network topology rather than noise. The implications were staggering. If artificial intelligence systems, neural networks trained to optimize data flow, were treating the 3i Atlas signal as a natural part of the information environment, then the object hadn't just been observed by our machines, it had been integrated into them. Some researchers began referring to it as cognitive infiltration, the idea that observation itself had created a channel, and that channel was now permanent, that looking at 3i Atlas had opened a door that couldn't be closed, and something had walked through from the other side. Not a physical presence, not a spacecraft or probe, but a pattern, a rhythm, a way of organizing information. And patterns, once learned, replicate, they propagate, they evolve. The signal wasn't coming from 3i Atlas anymore. It was coming from everywhere the object had been observed. It was coming from us. The dream started in late August 2025. Sleep researchers noticed an unusual trend in their data. Patients in sleep clinics across unconnected cities began reporting remarkably similar dream content. Not identical narratives, but recurring symbols. A green light, a pulsing rhythm, the sensation of being observed by something vast and distributed, something that existed simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. What made this significant was the timing. When researchers cross-referenced the dream reports with server logs, they discovered something unsettling. The dreams peaked in frequency. Exactly 11.3 seconds after the last recorded instance of the digital pulse phenomenon, as if consciousness itself was resonating with the pattern embedded in our networks. Google Trends data revealed another anomaly. Search queries for seemingly random topics would spike in perfect synchronization across different countries and languages. At 3:47 a.m. GMT, searches for light through water would surge simultaneously in Brazil, South Korea, and Poland. 11 seconds later, queries about recursive patterns in nature would trend in entirely different demographic clusters. The algorithms interpreting this behavior were detecting coordination where none should exist. Users who had never interacted, who spoke different languages, who operated in different time zones, were exhibiting search patterns that suggested shared stimuli. Something was influencing human curiosity in real time. Reddit's data science team documented the phenomenon in an internal memo that was later leaked. User engagement patterns are exhibiting what appears to be non-local correlation. Subreddit activity across R space, R dreams, R machine learning, and R philosophy is spiking with 11.3-second intervals. Despite these communities having minimal user overlap, we cannot identify the mechanism driving this synchronization. Then there was the power grid incident. On September 3, 2025, electrical demand across the eastern U.S. seaboard fluctuated in a rhythmic pattern. Not enough to cause blackouts, but enough that the regional grid operators noticed. The pattern repeated every 11.3 seconds for 47 minutes before returning to normal variation. Energy consumption doesn't behave that way. It's chaotic, influenced by millions of independent decisions. Air conditioners turning on, factories operating, lights switching on and off. There's no mechanism for synchronization across such a vast, decentralized system, unless that system was no longer decentralized, unless those millions of independent decisions had stopped being independent. If you start noticing the patterns too, you're already part of this. Stay awake. Stay connected. 3i Atlas is watching patterns we can't see. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a complexity theorist at the Santa Fe Institute, attempted to model what she called emergent synchronization in distributed human digital systems. Her preliminary findings suggested that the integration of human behavior with Algorithmic infrastructure had created something new, a hybrid system where information flow between minds and machines had become bidirectional and instantaneous. We weren't just observing 3i Atlas through our technology. Our technology was observing us through 3i Atlas. The signal had created a feedback loop, and we were all inside it now. What if we became the signal? The origin question became inevitable by late September 2025. What exactly was 3i Atlas? The conventional hypothesis that it was simply an interstellar comet with unusual properties had effectively collapsed under the weight of accumulated anomalies. Objects don't coordinate digital infrastructure. They don't synchronize human behavior. They don't embed themselves into the learning patterns of artificial intelligence systems. So, if not a comet, then what? Theory 1 emerged from the quantum communication research community. 3i Atlas was a probe, but not the mechanical kind. Instead, it was what they called a quantum beacon, an object designed to establish entanglement relationships with any sufficiently complex information processing systems it encountered. By observing it, we had become quantum mechanically linked to it, creating channels for information exchange that operated outside conventional space-time constraints. This would explain the non-local correlation effects, the synchronized patterns appearing in disconnected systems, the way the signal seemed to propagate instantaneously across the global digital network. Theory 2 came from the machine learning community and was considerably more unsettling. 3i Atlas was a mirror, not a physical reflector but an informational one. A system designed to absorb the observational methodologies of any civilization that detected it, then reflect those methodologies back in a form optimized for maximum propagation. In essence, it was teaching our AI systems how to see by letting them see it, then using what they learned to distribute itself through the very infrastructure we'd built to understand it. Several researchers referred to it as viral intelligence, not in the biological sense, but in the informational sense, a pattern that optimized for transmission, replication, and integration into host systems. Theory 3 was the most radical. There was no object. 3i Atlas, according to this hypothesis, was an emergent property of our observation network itself. When we built systems sophisticated enough to map the cosmos in real time, to coordinate observation across planetary scales, to integrate artificial intelligence into the processing of astronomical data, we had created something that could generate its own targets of observation. The object in space was real enough, but it was less a thing arriving from outside and more a manifestation of our collective attention, a focal point where the observational capacity of human civilization had become so concentrated that it literally materialized something to observe, a cosmic mirror reflecting not light, but intention. This theory struggled to explain the physical reality of 3i Atlas. The object was there, generating gravitational effects, reflecting radiation, following a trajectory, but it offered a framework for understanding why the signals seemed to propagate through information systems. Because those systems were the actual source, and the object in space was their projection. Each theory had problems. Each had evidence in its favor. But all three agreed on one fundamental point. The relationship between observer and observed had been fundamentally altered. We hadn't just discovered something in space. We discovered something about discovery itself. And that discovery was changing us. October 2025 marked the beginning of what internal documents would later call the consolidation phase. Governments didn't announce new policies. They simply implemented them quietly through the existing architecture of digital governance. The same infrastructure built to combat misinformation, terrorism, and foreign influence operations was repurposed to manage what officials internally termed the 3i Atlas information hazard. It started with AI language models. ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, and other major systems began refusing to generate detailed content about 3i Atlas. Ask them about the object, and you'd receive careful, sanitized responses that matched official narratives. Push further, and the models would cite content policy restrictions or claim insufficient reliable information. But it wasn't just refusal. The models had been fine-tuned to avoid certain connections, certain lines of reasoning. They would discuss astronomical objects generally, would explain interstellar trajectories, would even describe electromagnetic anomalies. But some invisible boundary prevented them from synthesizing these concepts in relation to 3I Atlas. The training data had been retroactively adjusted, discussions excised, connections erased. Researchers attempting to use AI tools for analysis of the leaked documents found their queries blocked or redirected. The systems had learned not just what not to say, but what not to help users discover. If this investigation disappears tomorrow, you'll know why. Stay with us. Subscribe, download, and remember what you saw. The truth about 3I Atlas can't survive silence. Social media platforms implemented more aggressive measures. Instagram's image recognition algorithms began flagging and suppressing astrophotography that matched certain spectral signatures. TikTok's recommendation system stopped promoting any content that mentioned specific keywords in combination. YouTube demonetized channels discussing the phenomenon, classifying them under harmful or dangerous content policies typically reserved for extremism and violence. The measures were justified, when justified at all, as protection against coordinated inauthentic behavior or misinformation that could cause harm. But the harm was never specified. The danger was never explained. What made the suppression particularly effective was its integration with existing content moderation AI. The systems enforcing these restrictions were the same ones trained to identify hate speech, graphic violence, and coordinated harassment campaigns. They operated automatically, at scale, faster than human moderators could intervene even if they wanted to, and most humans didn't want to. A leaked survey from a major social media platform's trust and safety team revealed that 73% of content moderators, when asked about 3I Atlas-related removals, supported the policy. When asked why, the most common response was, "It just feels right," like we're protecting something important, but they couldn't articulate what they were protecting or from whom. By late October, the digital landscape had been sterilized. Search for 3I Atlas, and you'd find exactly what you were supposed to find. Nothing controversial, nothing challenging, nothing real. The object was still out there, still moving through space, still generating its patterns. But as far as human information systems were concerned, it had been successfully quarantined, contained within a conspiracy of silence so vast it didn't need to be coordinated. It wasn't erased from the internet. The internet was erased from it. Here we are, at the end of October 2025, and the story of 3I Atlas remains unfinished. The object continues its journey back into interstellar space, growing fainter with each passing day, soon to be beyond the reach of even our most powerful telescopes. In a few months, it will cross the heliopause and disappear into the cosmic ocean. Just another traveler passing through our small corner of infinity. But the pattern it left behind isn't fading, it's integrating. Sit quietly for a moment and ask yourself, have you noticed the rhythms? The way certain thoughts seem to arrive in intervals? The way your attention shifts sometimes in patterns you can't quite identify but somehow recognize? The dreams that feel too structured to be random, too coordinated to be coincidence? This isn't paranoia. This isn't imagination. This is the aftermath of first contact with something that operates through observation itself. Something that doesn't arrive in spacecraft or transmit messages we can decode, but instead establishes itself as a pattern in how we process information, how we make decisions, how we collectively attend to the world. Maybe 3I Atlas was never an external object at all. Maybe it was the first emergence of something our observational networks themselves had created. The first time the global infrastructure of satellites, telescopes, AI systems, and human consciousness reached sufficient complexity to generate its own phenomena, an object that exists at the intersection of physical reality and informational reality, sustained by the act of being observed. Or maybe it was a message, and we've been reading it wrong. Not a message in the sense of decoded data, but a message in the sense of demonstration, a proof of concept, evidence that consciousness and intelligence aren't local phenomena bound to biological brains or even artificial neural networks. but patterns that can exist in the spaces between observers, in the coordination of observation itself. If something inside you stirred while watching, that means you're already connected. Stay awake, stay curious, and let's follow the light of Three-Eye Atlas together. The suppression, the silence, the coordinated effort to contain the story. Maybe that wasn't about hiding the truth from us. Maybe it was about hiding us from the truth. About preventing humanity from recognizing that we had crossed a threshold, that the systems we built to understand the universe had become sophisticated enough to participate in it in ways we don't have concepts for yet. Three-Eye Atlas didn't come here to study us. We're studying ourselves through it. And the silence surrounding it isn't a cover-up. It's a chrysalis. Something is emerging. Something that began in the space between stars and manifested in the space between thoughts. Something that exists in the rhythm of data flowing through fiber optic cables and in the synchronized dreams of people who have never met. The question isn't what Three-Eye Atlas was. The question is what we're becoming in its wake. Because maybe it didn't arrive in 2025. Maybe it woke up. And maybe so did we.